The Christmas my brother destroyed himself. The invitation arrived by text, which told me everything I needed to know about how the year had gone. Not a call. Not a card with handwriting on the envelope the way my mother used to do when I was in college. Just a text, 11 words, no greeting attached. Christmas at the house. We expect you. Don't be late. I read it twice on the tarmac at O'Hare, standing beside my roller bag in the jetway, the cold air from the gate pushing through the gap in the door. My assistant Priya was already pulling up my return flight confirmation on her tablet. I had a 40-minute window before boarding for the client meeting in Cincinnati, and I was already thinking about the quarterly operations report for Route Division 3, which was underperforming by 11% and needed my attention before January hit with its particular brand of urgency. I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I put my phone face down on the seat beside me, opened the operations file, and went to work. This is the thing people never quite believe when I tell them. I was not angry. Not the way they expect. The anger had been real once. I want to be honest about that. Sharp and consuming and exhausting in the way that anger is when you're young and you haven't yet figured out that carrying it costs more than the people who caused it ever paid. I'd burned through most of it somewhere in year 3 of building the company, during a particularly brutal February when I was sleeping on a pull-out sofa in the back office of my first warehouse in Gary, Indiana, surviving on gas station coffee and the bone-deep certainty that I was either going to make this work or I wasn't. And either way, my family's opinion of me was going to remain exactly what it was regardless of the outcome. So I stopped feeding the anger. I kept showing up to holidays. I kept answering the texts. I kept being the person my mother introduced as the serious one and my father called the quiet one and my brother Marcus referred to, depending on his mood, as either nothing at all or something I won't reproduce here. What I never did, not once, not in 10 years of building, was explain myself. That choice had roots, and the roots went deep. Marcus Jerome Calloway was 4 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, he was the family's designated gravitational center. This wasn't imagined. It was architectural. He had the grades that made my parents beam at parent-teacher nights. He had the scholarship to Northwestern when everyone else in our extended family had gone to state schools. He had the law degree and the firm offer and the beautiful wife, Claudette, and the house in Wilmette that my parents toured twice before he bought it and referenced in conversation, at actual dinners, for the following 3 years as evidence of something they couldn't quite name, but needed everyone to acknowledge. He was not, I want to be fair here, a villain in the way that requires a clean origin story. He was a man who had been told from early childhood that he was exceptional, and who had come to understand his exceptionalism as a comparative thing, which meant it required someone nearby to be measurably less than him in order to stay legible. Someone who could serve as the contrast that made his light visible. That was the role I was assigned. Not maliciously, not in any meeting anyone called. Just gradually, the way these things happen in families, through accumulated small decisions, through the particular attention paid to one child's achievements and the particular silence around another's. I was not stupid. I knew that. My father knew that in his way. But knowing a thing and doing something about it are different skills, and my father had only ever developed one of them. I went to University of Illinois at Chicago because the scholarship that would have taken me further fell through in March of my senior year, a loss I absorbed in my bedroom with the door closed and then moved past because there was nothing else to do. I took a logistics coordinator job after graduation, which my father treated as a near tragedy and my mother treated as a temporary situation that would resolve itself once I figured out what I really wanted. Marcus told his friends I worked in shipping, which was technically accurate and tonally exact. 3 years into that job, I started the company. I told no one in my family, partly because I didn't know if it would work, and I could not bear the particular flavor of their sympathy if it didn't. Partly because I already knew, with a clarity that required no evidence to confirm, what Marcus would say. I told my closest friend Tamara, who had been with me since 7th grade, and who cried on the phone when I told her about landing the first federal contract. I told my CFO, Brendan Osei, who had joined me in month 11 when the company was still technically a gamble and who had the financial precision and the emotional steadiness that I needed beside me. I told my operations director, Luz Reyes, who had been with me since month 7 and who ran route divisions 1 and 2 with the organized intensity of someone who takes personal offense at inefficiency. But I did not tell my family. It was not a scheme. I want to be clear about that, because the word trap gets used later, and it's not accurate. It was exhaustion, plainly described. I did not want their praise because their praise would arrive wearing ownership. My mother telling her church friends, my father calling to say he always knew, Marcus finding some angle from which my success could be reframed as adjacent to his own or diminished by comparison to something he considered more serious. I had watched him do that with other people's accomplishments. I did not want to hand him mine and watch him work. So I kept going. I grew Meridian Freight Solutions. I signed the contracts. I hired the people. By year 7, the company employed 340 people across 12 states. By year 9, the independent valuation, conducted that September by a firm I trusted, came back at $163 million. I had 2 active federal contracts with the Department of Transportation totaling $28 million, one of which carried a classification that meant I couldn't discuss it in most rooms. I owned my apartment in the West Loop outright. I had a good life, full of work I believed in, and people who knew the real version of me. And on holidays I drove back to Evanston and ate whatever my mother cooked and deflected questions about my job with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for a decade. The silence read as failure to people who had no other data. I understood that. I had made the choice anyway. Dr. Anita Voss, Thursday morning's video call from wherever I happened to be, had been working with me for 4 years on what she called the cost of invisibility. Not the strategic invisibility, which she understood and didn't pathologize. The other kind. The way that being unseen by the people who are supposed to know you best creates a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't go away just because you've built something remarkable. You can be successful and still grieve the witness you didn't have, she told me once, during a session I'd called in from a parking garage in Memphis, because it was the only private space available. I thought about that a lot in the months before Christmas. There was a secondary thread I hadn't fully dealt with, one that Brendan had surfaced 14 months earlier with the careful neutrality of someone stepping into territory they know is loaded. I need to show you something, he'd said, setting a printed document on my desk. It's not directly connected to Meridian, but you should know about it. The document was a bank record, an account I didn't recognize in Marcus's name, or more precisely, with Marcus as co-signatory alongside a name I didn't recognize. The account had received a series of wire transfers, irregular amounts, beginning in March 2021 and continuing through August of the prior year. 14 transfers in total. Combined, $210,000. Brendan had come across it through a contact at a firm that did financial compliance work, a routine cross-check that had flagged the account because of its connection to a client trust fund managed by the law firm where Marcus was a senior associate. I sat with the document for a long time. How confident are you in this? I asked. Confident enough to bring it to you, Brendan said. I told him to document everything, secure it, and say nothing further. He did. I did not open that folder again. I didn't know in October when Tamara called me with news about the private investigator, whether what Brendan had found was relevant. I only knew it existed. Tamara called on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks before Christmas, during what should have been a quiet hour. He hired someone, she said, without preamble. A private investigator. Our cousin Diane found out from Aunt Bernadette. He's been running an investigation into you for almost 2 months. I was quiet. I was at my desk, watching sleet move across the 41st floor window in gray diagonal lines. He's going to present findings at Christmas dinner, Tamara continued. In front of everyone. Denise, he's planned this whole thing. He's invited people who don't normally come, Aunt Bernadette, Uncle David. He wants an audience. Okay, I said. That's all you have to say? What would you like me to say? I would like you to be upset, so I feel less alone in being upset on your behalf. That made me smile, which was something Tamara had always been able to do. I appreciate you telling me. I'm going to call James. James Okafor had been my attorney for 6 years and knew Meridian's complete profile, every contract, every valuation, every document. I called him from the car on the way home. He listened without interrupting, then said, What do you want to do? Nothing. I'm going to Christmas dinner. A pause. And if he presents the report? Then I'll sit there while he does. Another pause. You know, if he hired someone competent, then he'll find the company. Yes. I watch the city pass outside the window. And if he's thorough, he may find other things too. James understood what I meant. Call me from the car if it goes sideways. It won't go sideways, I said. It'll go exactly where it goes. I thought, the whole drive home, about what a former FBI investigator with 60-plus days would find when they looked into Meridian Freight Solutions. The federal registration, the DOT authority, the 340 employees, the incorporated magazine features, the valuation, the contracts. It was not a small footprint. It was not something that could be explained away as fabrication. And then I thought about what a thorough investigator, a truly professional one, following standard practice, would find if they cross-referenced related parties. If they pulled financial records connected to the subject's family members, as professionals sometimes did when building a full picture. If they had the access and the ethics to follow what they found. I did not call Brendan. I did not pull the folder. I simply thought about it, quietly, on the drive home through the gray December city. Then I opened the Route Division 3 file and worked until 11. Christmas at my parents' house in Evanston was, as always, warm on the surface and load-bearing underneath. My mother, Gloria, had done the house the way she did every year, garland on the banister, the ceramic nativity on the mantel that had been in the family since before I was born, the smell of ham and sweet potato pie moving through the whole downstairs from early morning. She hugged me at the door and held on a beat longer than usual, which I noticed and filed away. My father, Robert, was in his chair by the window with the Tribune, not reading it, watching the street. He nodded when I came in. The guest list was larger than a typical Christmas. Aunt Bernadette, who lived in Naperville and usually did her own family's celebration. Uncle David and his wife Patricia. My cousin Diane, who caught my eye immediately when I walked into the living room and gave me a look I read as I tried. Marcus's wife Claudette was in the kitchen. Marcus himself was near the fireplace when I arrived, talking to Uncle David, and he turned when I walked in with a particular expression I knew well, a small, settled smile, the smile of someone who had already scripted the evening and was confident in his material. Denise. He didn't move toward me. You made it, Marcus. I set my coat on the rack, kissed my mother's cheek, and found the kitchen to get a glass of water. Claudette was at the counter arranging the bread rolls when I came in. She looked up, and something moved across her face. Not quite guilt, not quite warning, but the particular expression of someone who knows what's coming and has decided she can't stop it and is not entirely comfortable with that decision. Hey, she said. Hey. I poured my water. Need help with anything? No, she said. Then, quieter. Denise. I looked at her. She started to say something and stopped. Started again and stopped. Then she just shook her head and turned back to the rolls. I took my water to the dining room and sat down. Dinner was my mother's full production. The ham, the sweet potato pie, the green beans with a smoked turkey she'd been making since we were children, the dinner rolls that Claudette had been arranging, the sparkling cider for the people who didn't drink. Conversation moved the way it always did. My father asking Uncle David about his car, my mother updating Aunt Bernadette on the neighbor's renovation, my cousin Diane making careful small talk with everyone while not quite meeting anyone's eyes directly. By 6:45 the plates were mostly cleared, and I could feel the room change. It's a specific feeling, the way a gathering shifts when someone is about to do the thing they came to do. The air gets slightly denser. Conversation slows in a particular way. People stop starting new topics because something is about to render all existing topics irrelevant. Marcus set down his fork. I want to say something, he said. Before dessert. My mother looked pleased. My father set down his glass. Claudette looked at the table. As a family, Marcus said, with the measured cadence of someone who had rehearsed, I think we've spent a long time being patient, asking questions and getting silence. Trying to be supportive and not knowing what we're actually supporting. He looked at me directly. I love my sister. I want that on the record. But I also think honesty is what families owe each other. Real honesty, not performance. Marcus, Claudette said. I'm almost done. He held up one hand. For years, Denise has claimed to run a company. A large company. A successful company. And no one in this family has seen a shred of evidence that this company is what she says it is. No clients named. No office visited. No financial reality that any of us can verify. He paused. I got tired of wondering. So, 3 months ago, I hired a private investigator. Aunt Bernadette gasped faintly, which I suspected was not entirely spontaneous. Former FBI. 21 years of experience. I paid him to do a full professional investigation into Denise's background, her business claims, her financials. Everything. Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a business card, setting it on the table with the deliberateness of someone who has imagined this moment. He's here tonight. He'll present his findings now, in front of everyone. He looked at me when he said everyone. I checked my watch. It was 6:52 p.m. A man appeared from the hallway. He had been in my father's study, I realized, waiting. He was in his early 60s, gray-haired, trim in the way of someone who had been disciplined about physical maintenance for decades. He carried a dark leather portfolio and had the particular expression of someone who has delivered findings in rooms like this before and has long since stopped having feelings about the reactions. His name was Richard Farwell. He set the portfolio on the table. Good evening. His voice was level and unhurried. I was retained 63 days ago to conduct a professional investigation into the background and professional claims of Denise Calloway. He looked briefly at me, then at Marcus, then at no one in particular. Before I begin, I want to establish something for this room. I conduct all investigations according to full professional standards. That means complete disclosure of all material findings on all relevant subjects to all parties simultaneously. I was retained to find the truth. That is what I will present. He opened the portfolio. I'll begin with the primary subject of the investigation. The room was completely silent. My Uncle David had stopped breathing, or seemed to have. Denise Renee Calloway, age 38. Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Freight Solutions, LLC, headquartered at 215 West Monroe Street, Chicago, Illinois. He turned a page. Federal Employer Identification Number, verified. Department of Transportation Operating Authority confirmed active across 12 states, current, and in good standing. Current full-time workforce, 341 employees. Annual payroll exceeding $24 million. He paused, not for effect, simply reading. Most recent independent valuation, conducted this past September by Alderman Pierce Valuations of New York, $163 million. My mother made a sound. It was very small. I didn't look at her. She holds active federal contractor status with the Department of Transportation. 2 current active contracts, combined stated value approximately $28 million. 1 contract carries a classification designation and could not be fully reviewed in scope. Its existence is confirmed through federal procurement public records. Another page turned. Meridian Freight Solutions appeared on Incorporated Magazine's list of fastest-growing private companies for 2 consecutive years, most recently this past spring. Ms. Calloway was profiled in Logistics Today magazine in April of the prior year. She holds no personal debt. She owns her primary residence outright. Current market value approximately $1.1 million. He closed the first section. There is no evidence of fraudulent representation in any professional or personal context. No financial irregularity. No fabricated credentials. No misrepresentation of any kind. The silence in the room had a texture now, dense and particular. Farwell did not look at Marcus. He looked at the portfolio. I now need to present a second set of findings. His voice did not change in register or pace. As is standard in my professional practice, when an investigation surfaces information pertaining to other named individuals connected to the primary subject, particularly when that information relates to potential criminal activity, I am required to present those findings to all relevant parties simultaneously. I do not selectively withhold material findings. That is not how I work. It has never been how I work. Marcus had gone very still. I watched him understand. In the course of conducting a thorough investigation of Ms. Calloway's professional background and financial network, I identified an account carrying the name Marcus Jerome Calloway as co-signatory. Farwell turned to the relevant section of the portfolio. The account received a series of 14 wire transfers beginning in March of 2021 and concluding in August of this year. The transfers originated from a client trust fund administered by the law firm of Hargrove, Bell and Caston, where Mr. Calloway holds a senior associate position. He paused. Total amount transferred, $210,000. Aunt Bernadette's hand went over her mouth. These transfers are not documented as authorized disbursements, legal fees, loans, or any other sanctioned financial instrument in the firm's disclosed records. They are irregular in amount and timing in patterns consistent with deliberate structuring to avoid automatic reporting thresholds. He closed the portfolio section. I have forwarded the complete findings, including all supporting financial documentation, to the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission and to the Financial Crimes Unit of the relevant federal district, as is my professional and, in this case, legal obligation upon discovery of evidence of potential criminal conduct. He closed the portfolio fully. I'm available for questions from any party present. No one asked a question. For approximately 4 seconds, nothing in the room moved. It was the kind of silence that happens when something permanent has just occurred and the people present are still processing the irreversibility of it. Then Marcus's chair scraped back hard against the hardwood floor. He was on his feet, and the color had gone out of his face in a way that made him look like a different person, older and reduced, and frightened in a way I had never seen on him before. "You went outside the scope," he said. His voice was strange. "I hired you to investigate her. You had no authorization to." "The scope of the engagement was full professional investigation," Farwell said, with the calm of someone who has had this conversation before. "That's what the contract states. That's what you signed. That is what I delivered. I didn't authorize you to investigate me. You authorized a thorough professional investigation into connected parties. Your name appeared as a connected party in the financial network of the primary subject." Farwell picked up the portfolio. "I followed the evidence. That is the job." "You can't just—" Marcus stopped. He looked at me. I had kept my hands folded on the table through all of it. I looked back at him. I did not say anything, because everything had already been said by someone else, and the room had heard all of it. "You knew." The strangeness in his voice shifted into something more raw. "You knew what he would find. You knew about." "I knew what you would find," I said. Quietly, evenly. "I've known for 14 months. And you sat here and let this happen." "Marcus." I kept my voice level. "You hired the investigator. You paid for the investigation. You invited everyone here tonight. You asked for the truth to be presented in front of this family." I held his gaze. "I didn't do any of that. You did." He stood there for a moment that was longer than it seemed. His wife had not moved. Claudette was looking at him with an expression that told me she had suspected something, maybe not the specific shape of it, but the outline, and that whatever she had suspected, the confirmation of it was landing somewhere deep and final. "You should call your attorney," I said. "Not the firm's attorneys. Your own." His hand was already in his pocket. He moved toward the hallway, phone to his ear before he reached it, voice dropping to something urgent and low and private, and my father got to his feet without quite knowing what to do once he was standing, and my mother said Marcus in a tone I had genuinely never heard from her in my life, not pride, not frustration, something thinner and more frightened than either. Richard Farwell nodded to me, collected his portfolio, and left through the front door without fanfare. The room sat in the aftermath. My cousin Diane poured coffee at 9:15 after the house had mostly gone quiet. Marcus had left at 8, the sound of the front door behind him carrying the particular finality of a door that knows it's been a threshold. Claudette had gone upstairs. My Uncle David and Aunt Patricia had made their excuses at 8:30. Aunt Bernadette was in the living room with my mother, speaking in low voices. Diane set the mug in front of me and sat down across the table. I tried, she said. I know. Thank you for telling Tamara. Are you okay? I thought about that honestly, which I had been trying to do for years with questions like that instead of defaulting to fine. I don't know yet, I said. I think I need a few days before I know. She nodded. That was the right answer, and she recognized it. What I was sitting with was not what I had expected. People assume vindication feels like relief. It does. Partially, there's a real release in no longer carrying a secret that was never really yours to carry, in watching the fiction of who your family thought you were dissolve in front of people who now have to revise everything. That part was real, but it sat alongside something else. Something I hadn't fully prepared for, though Dr. Voss had told me, once, in a session I'd called in from a parking garage in Memphis. The hardest part of being seen is that you can't unsee what looking cost everyone else. Marcus was my brother. Not a cardboard antagonist, not a symbol. He was 4 years older and had taught me to ride a bike in the alley behind our house and had come to my high school graduation and, somewhere along the way, had become so invested in a version of me that served a purpose for him that he'd spent money and months trying to prove it. And in doing so, he had proved something entirely different, something that was going to cost him his license, probably his position at the firm, possibly his freedom for a period, and certainly the version of his marriage that had existed this morning. He had done all of that himself. I had not architected it, but I was at the table when it collapsed, and that was going to be part of my memory of Christmas for the rest of my life, threaded through everything else. James called at 10:15. I saw the ARDC filing come through, he said. James had contacts in places I didn't ask about. Do you need anything tonight?
No.
Tomorrow? Tomorrow I'm going to drive home, go to the office, and finish the Route Division 3 review before the new year. A pause that I recognized as James not saying something he'd decided not to say. All right, he said instead. Call me if that changes. Merry Christmas, James. Merry Christmas, Denise. I said goodbye to my parents before I left. My father was standing in the hallway, hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. He looked older than he had at dinner, which was only 2 hours ago, and that was the visible cost of an evening like this. Not just for the people at the center of it, but for the people on the edges who thought they knew the room they were standing in. I didn't know, my father said. About which part he didn't specify. I chose to hear it as both. I know you didn't, I said. Without bitterness, I mean that. It was simply true. That was the point. I needed to build it without it becoming something the family owned a piece of. I needed it to be mine. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his face that might have been shame, or might have been grief, or might have been the particular expression of a man realizing that the quiet child he had underestimated had built something he didn't have the framework to measure. Maybe all three. I'm proud of you, he said. It came out rough, like something he'd had to push through. I nodded. I didn't say thank you, because I wasn't sure what I felt about hearing it in this moment, in this context, after this evening. That was something for a Thursday morning call with Dr. Voss. My mother hugged me at the door. She held on longer than she normally did, and I held still until she was ready to let go. Then I walked to my car in the cold. The drive home on the Edens was quiet in the way December drives can be. The sleet had cleared, the temperature had dropped, and the city lights were very sharp and very still in the cold air, the kind of clarity that only comes when everything has frozen solid and the atmosphere has gone clean. I drove with the heat on and the radio off, and I thought most of the way about Route Division 3. 11% underperformance. The issue was almost certainly the subcontractor handoff in the Indianapolis hub, which Luz had flagged in October and which I'd asked her to monitor through Q3. I needed the full data picture before I could make the call on whether to restructure the contract or pull it entirely. Brendan would have the financials ready. I'd blocked the morning. I thought about my 340 employees. About the Indianapolis hub coordinator, a woman named Charisse who had 3 kids and had been with Meridian for 4 years and who ran the tightest manifest processing in the entire Eastern operation. About the drivers on the overnight routes who would work through New Year's. About the things that were real and ongoing and mine to take care of. I thought about Marcus once directly, not with anger, but with the particular sadness of watching someone choose a version of a story that required you to be small, and then watching what happens when the story turns out to be wrong. I did not know what would happen to him legally. That was not mine to determine. Whatever consequences arrived would arrive, through processes that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with choices he had made long before this evening. I thought about my father's face in the hallway. I thought about Claudette upstairs, alone with something she had suspected and now knew. I pulled into my building's garage at 11:52 p.m., took the elevator up, made tea. The particular loose-leaf blend Tamara had sent me from a shop in Brooklyn that I kept for evenings like this, evenings that needed something deliberate. I stood at my window with the mug and looked at the city for a while. The lights were very clear. Somewhere out there, 340 people would wake up tomorrow and do work that I had built something for them to do, and that was real, and it had always been real, and it was still real tonight regardless of everything that had happened at a dinner table in Evanston. Then I sat down at my desk, opened the Route Division 3 file, and got back to work. If you've ever built something quietly, something real and hard and yours, while the people around you waited for you to fail, I want to hear from you. What kept you going when no one was watching? Leave it in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it tonight.